She stood in a ballroom full of candlelight and laughter, watching her husband smile at another woman the way he had not smiled at her in 3 years. And in that moment, Abigail Ashford made the only decision that would either save her soul or destroy everything she had ever known. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply removed the diamond necklace from her throat, placed it in his palm, and walked out of a marriage that had been slowly killing her one silent dinner at a time. If you have ever loved someone who made you feel invisible, stay with me. Don't forget to subscribe and support us. The necklace was cold against her skin. Abigail had noticed that detail earlier in the evening, how the diamonds caught the candlelight but gave back no warmth. How the gold chain pressed against her collarbone like something that did not quite belong there anymore. She had worn it every evening for 3 years. Every formal dinner, every society ball, every quiet supper where she sat across from a man who looked through her like she was made of glass. She wore it because Benjamin had given it to her on their wedding day. She wore it because she believed for a very long time that the gesture meant something. Standing near the tall windows of the Ashford Estate ballroom on that particular October night, Abigail finally understood that she had been wrong. The room was everything wealth could buy. 200 candles burned in the chandeliers overhead. The orchestra played Haydn from the far corner. Couples moved across the polished floor in practiced circles, the men in dark wool coats, the women in silk and lace, their laughter rising and falling like a tide that never quite reached the shore where Abigail stood alone. She was 31 years old. She was dressed in deep blue satin that the modiste in London had declared was perfectly suited to her complexion. She was the wife of Benjamin Ashford, heir to one of the oldest fortunes in the north of England, a man whose name commanded respect in every county from Yorkshire to London. And she had not held a real conversation with her husband in 47 days. She had counted. Abigail was not the kind of woman who made a scene. She never had been. Her mother had raised her with careful instructions about what a lady of good breeding did and did not do in public. And chief among those instructions was this: a wife does not embarrass her husband, even when her husband was the one doing the embarrassing. Even when the rumors had grown loud enough that even the kitchen staff exchanged glances when she entered the room, she had held herself together through the whispers about the widow in London. She had held herself together through the rumors about the socialite from Bath. She had told herself both times that she was misreading the situation, that Benjamin was simply careless with appearances, that he did not understand how the gossip spread, how it landed, how it felt to walk into a room and sense the shift, the way the other wives looked at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite satisfaction, but lived uncomfortably between the two. She had told herself a great many things over 3 years. She had become very skilled at it. But standing at that window on that October night, watching her husband lean toward Victoria Beaumont, watching the way he laughed, open and easy, the tension gone from his shoulders, his eyes warm in a way they simply were not. Not when they looked at Abigail, she ran out of things to tell herself, because she recognized that laugh. She had heard it years ago, before the wedding, before the title, before the estate, and the obligations, and the slow, quiet freezing over of everything she thought their life would be. She had heard Benjamin laugh exactly like that when they first met at the Harrington Assembly, when he was still simply a young man from a good family, and she was a girl from a modest one, and none of the distance between them had yet been built. He used to laugh like that with her. Victoria Beaumont was 24 years old and had been recently widowed by a baronet whose death left her reasonably comfortable and entirely unencumbered. She wore her dark hair in fashionable curls and possessed the particular talent of making any man in her vicinity feel that he was the most interesting person in the room. Abigail had met her twice before tonight. Both times Victoria had been perfectly pleasant, which somehow made everything worse. Abigail watched her husband touch Victoria's elbow to guide her attention toward something across the room. A small gesture, automatic, intimate in its casualness, and she felt something in her chest go very, very quiet. Not break. She had felt it breaking for months. This was different. This was the sound after the breaking, the silence where something used to be. She set her champagne glass on the windowsill with careful precision. She smoothed her gloves. She crossed the ballroom. People noticed. She could feel it, the slight pause in nearby conversations, the way heads turned just a degree or two as she moved through the crowd. The other wives. The men who knew Benjamin. The young women who had watched the whole evening with the particular attention of those who are witnessing something they will discuss for weeks. Abigail did not look at any of them. She walked directly to her husband. Benjamin saw her coming. She watched his expression shift, the open warmth closing down, the easy smile becoming something more careful, more managed. His shoulders rose slightly. He straightened. He knew. Of course he knew. Abigail. His voice was pleasant, the voice he used in public. I was just telling Victoria about the East Wing restoration. You remember how that project consumed the entire summer? Benjamin. Her own voice surprised her with its steadiness. Victoria smiled at her with precisely calibrated graciousness. Lady Ashford, what a lovely evening. Your home is magnificent. Thank you. Abigail looked at her husband. I wonder if I might have a moment. The pause that followed was not long, perhaps 4 seconds. But Benjamin's jaw tightened in a way she recognized, and in those 4 seconds she understood exactly what his response was going to be before he spoke it. Of course. He touched her arm briefly, turning slightly toward Victoria. You will excuse us a moment. Victoria's smile did not waver. Naturally. Benjamin guided Abigail a few steps away, just far enough for the pretense of privacy, in a room full of people watching them from the corners of their eyes. His hand was at the small of her back, steering, controlling. This is not the time, he said quietly, pleasantly, through an expression arranged for onlookers. Whatever concerns you, we can discuss it in the morning. How long? She did not match his pleasant tone. She kept her voice low, but she did not perform. Abigail. How long has it been going on with Victoria? Nothing is going on. The words came out practiced smooth, the way words do when they have been rehearsed. I have told you before, you allow the gossips to. How long with the woman in Bath? His expression flickered. And the widow before her, the one whose name I was never supposed to know. She paused. I know her name, Benjamin. I have known it for 8 months. The orchestra finished a movement, and there was a brief hush before the next piece began. In that hush, the air between them felt very still. I have been, he said carefully, very patient with your suspicions. Patient. She repeated the word the way one picks up an object that has been left in the wrong place. Yes, you have been very patient. This is not the time. You have been patient while I sat alone at dinner for 6 weeks. While I attended Lady Harrington's luncheon, and everyone at the table already knew things about my marriage that I was still trying to convince myself weren't true. She was not raising her voice. She would not raise her voice. You have been patient while I wore this necklace every night, like it still meant what it meant the day you gave it to me. Benjamin looked away from her briefly toward the rest of the room, checking who was watching, calculating. That glance was the final thing. She reached up and unclasped the necklace. It took her 2 tries. Her hands were not entirely steady, but she got it, and she held the chain and its pendant in her palm, the diamonds catching candlelight one last time. She held her hand out toward him. He stared at it. Abigail, do not do this here. I am not doing anything dramatic. Her voice was very quiet now, almost gentle. I am simply returning something that no longer belongs where I have been keeping it. He did not take it. So she placed it in his breast pocket carefully with 2 fingers. Like a woman folding a letter she has finished reading. I spent 3 years, she said, trying to become the woman you wanted. I changed the way I dressed, the way I spoke in company, the way I managed my opinions, so they would not inconvenience yours. I learned which rooms in this house you preferred not to find me in. A pause. I became very good at being wherever you were not. That is not... I am not angry. She found with some surprise that this was true. I am not angry anymore. I was angry for a long time, but I have been standing at this window for the last half hour, watching you laugh the way you used to laugh with me, and I find that I am not angry. She tilted her head slightly. I am simply finished. Abigail. His voice shifted, less managed now, something underneath it she could not quite name. You are my wife. I know what I am. She stepped back once. "You will not lose your freedom, Benjamin. I am not interested in creating a spectacle. You will have your estate, your title, your reputation." Another step. "What you will not have is me waiting for you, because I will not be waiting any longer." He reached for her arm. His fingers closed on her wrist. "You are making a scene. Then let me stop." She gently removed her wrist from his grip. "Let me save you the embarrassment." And she walked away. Through the ballroom. Through the entrance hall, where the footman stood at perfect attention and did not look at her face. Out through the great front doors into the cold October air, where her breath made small clouds and the gravel crunched under her slippers, and the sound of the orchestra faded behind her like something dissolving in water. Her carriage was sent for. She stood in the dark waiting for it, her bare throat cold without the necklace, and she did not cry. She had cried so many times in private. In her bedroom with the door locked, with her face pressed into the pillow so no one would hear. In the garden in the early mornings when Benjamin was still asleep, and she could sit on the bench near the roses and let herself fall apart before the day required her to assemble again. She had wept with the kind of exhausted, hopeless weeping that is not dramatic but simply necessary, the body's way of processing what the mind cannot hold. She had no tears left. The carriage came. She got in. The horses moved. And as the lights of Ashford Estate disappeared behind her in the darkness, Abigail Mercer, because she had decided on the drive that she would reclaim her father's name quietly, simply as a woman reclaims something that was always hers, allowed herself one long, steady breath. She did not know what came next. She was 31 years old. She had no children. She had a modest income from her family's estate that had always been technically hers, but practically irrelevant because a married woman's money was her husband's money, and she had spent 3 years forgetting that she had ever had a separate existence. She did not know what came next, but she knew with a clarity that surprised her with its cleanness that whatever came next, she would face it without performing, without shrinking, without watching the door to see if he was coming to find her. She had spent 3 years watching that door. She was finished watching doors. Benjamin stood in the middle of the Ashford Estate ballroom and watched his wife's carriage pull away through the window, and he thought with the comfortable certainty of a man who has always had people return to him that she would be back within the week. She always forgave him. She was Abigail. She forgave everything. He turned back to his guests, smoothed his expression into something easy and social, accepted a fresh glass from a passing footman, and resumed the evening. Victoria appeared at his elbow. Her dark eyes were bright with something that might have been sympathy and might have been satisfaction. And the line between the two was thin enough that he did not examine it closely. "Is everything all right?" She kept her voice low and private. "Perfectly fine." He sipped his champagne. "My wife has a tendency toward dramatics when she is tired." Victoria made a soft sound of understanding. Benjamin smiled, and somewhere in the back of his mind, under the practiced ease of the smile and the champagne and the candlelight, something very small and very quiet said, "She will not be back in a week." He told that voice to be quiet. He was very good at that. 3 days passed, then 5, then 10. Benjamin sent one letter to her family's estate in the first week, a brief, cool communication that made no specific acknowledgement of what had occurred, but inquired after her health and expressed the hope that she was finding rest. Abigail did not reply. He told himself she needed more time. He attended the Pembroke dinner, where he was seated beside a charming widow from Devonshire. He rode out twice with Harrington. He reviewed estate accounts with his solicitor and had 2 productive meetings about a proposed investment in Northern Mills. He was busy. He was fine. Everything was perfectly fine. At the end of the 3rd week he sent another letter. She did not reply to that one either. Howe was in his study when the silence became something he could no longer simply override with activity. He sat behind his desk on a Tuesday evening, the fire burning low, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow, and he looked at the chair near the window. Abigail used to sit there. She had her own sitting room. Of course, her own perfectly appointed spaces throughout the house, but in the evenings she had occasionally sat in the chair near his desk while he worked. She read mostly. She had a particular habit of annotating the margins of her books in small, precise handwriting, which had irritated him when he first noticed it because it seemed to him a desecration of good volumes. He had told her so once. She had looked at him with those gray eyes of hers direct, unafraid, the eyes of a woman who had not yet learned to make herself smaller around him, and said, "Then I suppose you shall have to buy me my own copies, and I will annotate those to my heart's content." He had been charmed by that. He remembered being charmed by that. The chair near his desk was empty. He picked up the brandy glass, looked at it, set it down without drinking. He told himself she would write back soon. So, she did not write back. What reached him instead, 6 weeks after the night of the ball, was a social communication from Lady Harrington, a woman with the information-gathering capacity of a military intelligence operation, wrapped in the exterior of a genteel Yorkshire matron, who mentioned in the middle of a long paragraph about the upcoming Michaelmas gathering that Lady Ashford, that is to say, Mrs. Mercer, as she was going by now, which Lady Harrington found quietly remarkable, had been seen in the villages near her family's estate, doing the most extraordinary things. Benjamin read the paragraph twice. She has apparently organized a school. Lady Harrington's pen had an unmistakable note of approval, even in its most neutral phrasing. For the children of the estate workers. It seems she approached the local vicar and 3 of the larger landholders in the county, and between them they have fitted out the old mill cottage with proper furniture and engaged a schoolmistress. Your wife, Mr. Ashford, or forgive me, I suppose I ought to say, Mrs. Mercer has apparently been visiting the families herself to persuade them to send their children. They say she brings food. She remembers everyone's names. The children have taken to calling her the book lady, which I find entirely charming. Benjamin put the letter down. He picked it up again. He read the paragraph a 3rd time. She remembers everyone's names. He thought about Abigail sitting in that chair near his desk, reading her annotated books, and felt something uncomfortable move through him, something he could not immediately name, and did not particularly want to. He had not known she was interested in education for tenant children. He had not known she was interested in it because he had never asked. He sat with that thought for a while. It was not a comfortable place to sit. The weeks accumulated. Victoria Beaumont came to call twice in November. She was spending the season in the county, staying with her cousin, and Benjamin received her both times, and both times he found himself distracted and restless in ways he could not explain to himself satisfactorily. Victoria was lovely. Victoria was warm and engaging, and possessed of exactly the kind of uncomplicated, unchallenging admiration that he had spent years pursuing. Sitting across from her in his drawing room, watching her laugh at something he had said, he felt nothing but a vague impatience he was not sure what to do with. He thought about the way Abigail had stood in the ballroom, not dramatic, not weeping, not begging him for anything, simply stating things. The way she had placed the necklace in his pocket with 2 fingers careful and final, like closing a ledger. I thought about how she had looked at him in the last moment before she stepped away. Not with anger. Not with hate. With a kind of exhausted clarity that he understood in retrospect was something far more devastating than either. I am simply finished. He had spent years being looked at with love and need and hope by that woman. He had taken all of it for granted, the love, the need, the hope, the way a man takes for granted, the warmth of a fire he did not build. It had been there. It had always been there. He had assumed it always would be. Looking into Victoria's bright, uncomplicated eyes across his drawing room, Benjamin Ashford realized that he might have been wrong. In December, he received word through mutual acquaintance that Abigail had been approached by Lord Fairfax, a widower of good standing with an estate in Lincolnshire, a man of 50 with a pleasant reputation and no apparent vices, who had called on her at her family home and been received. Benjamin heard this information on a Wednesday afternoon in his solicitor's office, delivered with careful casualness by the solicitor's younger clerk, who had no idea of the effect it would produce. He said nothing. He completed the meeting. He rode home in the cold December air with his jaw set and his breath coming too quickly for a man doing nothing more strenuous than sitting on a horse. And when he reached Ashford Estate, he went directly to his study and stood at the window for a long time, looking at the grounds. Lord Fairfax, a good man, By all accounts, a genuinely good man. The kind of man who would sit across from Abigail at dinner and ask her what she was reading. The kind of man who would notice her opinions before waiting to be asked for his own. The kind of man who would not make her smaller. Benjamin pressed his palm flat against the cold glass of the window. He had told himself for 3 months that she would come back. He had told himself she was waiting. She was not waiting. She had never been waiting. She had been living. And standing at that cold window, with Lord Fairfax's name lodged in his chest, like something that had no business being there. Benjamin Ashford finally, with the stubborn reluctance of a man who has avoided a mirror for a very long time, looked at what he actually was. He had married a woman who loved him without needing his title or his fortune, who had sat in the chair by his desk reading her annotated books and asking him questions he never bothered to answer, who had attended every dinner worn, every expected thing, managed every social obligation with quiet competence, and loved him genuinely, persistently, without conditions, while he spent 3 years looking everywhere else for something he apparently could not name. He had married a woman who was remarkable, and he had spent 3 years making her feel worthless. The fire in the grate burned steadily. The house was very quiet. Benjamin Ashford sat down in the chair behind his desk, not Abigail's chair, his own, the one that faced it, and for the first time in his adult life, he did not know what to do with himself. He had always known what to do. He had always known the next thing, the next room, the next social engagement, the next distraction, the next woman who made him feel interesting and desired and entirely free of consequence. He sat alone in his study in the December dark, and he faced the possibility for the first time, with something approaching honesty, that he had thrown away the only thing in his life that was real. If you have ever watched someone realize too late what they had, if you have ever been the one who stopped waiting, then you already know what comes next. Stay with us, because this story is not finished yet, and neither perhaps is hers. Subscribe and follow, because the women who walked away deserve to have their stories told every chapter, every hard-won mile of it. The letter Lord Fairfax sent was handwritten on cream stationery, folded twice, sealed with dark wax, and delivered on a Thursday morning in early January, when the frost had turned the fields outside Mercer Hall silver, and the kitchen fire had been burning since before dawn. Abigail read it, standing at the window of the small breakfast room, still in her wool morning dress, her hair not yet properly arranged because she had started her days differently now. No lady's maid summoned at 7. No careful orchestration of appearance before she was permitted to exist in her own house. She woke when she woke. She dressed when she chose. She ate when she was hungry. These were small freedoms, but after 3 years at Ashford Estate, where every hour had its expectation and every room had its performance requirement, they felt extraordinary. Lord Fairfax's letter was courteous, warm, precisely the right length. He wrote that he had heard much of her charitable work in the county. The school particularly had reached him through Lady Harrington, of course, because everything reached everyone through Lady Harrington eventually, and that he found himself with the desire to know more of the woman behind such efforts, if she would permit him the honor of calling upon her at her convenience. Abigail read it twice. She set it on the breakfast table. She poured her tea. She thought about it. Her mother appeared in the doorway, still wearing her cap, a state of undress she would never have permitted at any decent hour. But Mercer Hall in January operated on different rules than it had when Abigail was a girl. Her mother was 62 and had spent 40 years being a proper woman, and had arrived at a philosophy in recent years that being a proper woman was substantially overrated. Who is the letter from? Lord Fairfax of Lincolnshire. Her mother came in and sat down. Is that the widower, the one with the estate near the coast? I believe so. He has a very good reputation. Her mother reached for the teapot without asking. Your Aunt Margaret mentioned him last autumn. She said he was the kind of man who actually listened when a woman spoke to him, which she presented as remarkable, and which I found merely sad that this should be remarkable. A pause. Are you going to receive him? Abigail turned her cup in her hands. I don't know yet. You could think about it differently. Her mother set the teapot down. Not as a decision about Lord Fairfax specifically. simply as a decision about whether you are willing to let the world believe that you have become someone who never opens the door again. That is not what I am doing. I know it isn't. But it is what people will say if you don't receive callers. Her mother looked at her with the particular directness of women who have lived long enough to stop softening things. You are 31 years old, Abigail. You are not a woman who should spend her life shrinking. Abigail was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the estate dogs barked at something in the yard, and then was quiet. I will think about it, she said finally. Her mother made a small sound of satisfaction and reached for the sugar. She wrote back to Lord Fairfax on Friday. She told him he was welcome to call the following Thursday in the afternoon at whatever time was convenient to him. She wrote the letter herself, without consulting anyone, sealed it herself, and gave it to the footman herself. 3 small acts of autonomy that would have seemed absurd to her a year ago when she had a household staff of 40 and a social secretary who managed her correspondence. Now she had her mother's cook, 2 housemaids, a footman and a garden boy named Will, who was 14 and had an opinion about everything. She had not been this at ease in 3 years. That realization arrived on Thursday morning, the day of Lord Fairfax's visit, while she was standing in the school cottage watching 8 children between the ages of 6 and 11 practice their letters on small slates. The schoolmistress, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Holt, whom Abigail had recruited from the village and who had turned out to be extraordinarily gifted, was moving between the rows of children with calm, efficient authority. A girl named Nell, 7 years old, the daughter of the Mercer estate's head groom, had been struggling with the letter G for 3 weeks. This Thursday, without warning, she picked up her slate, held it up for Mrs. Holt to see, and on it was written her entire name in careful, uneven letters. Eleanor Briggs. Mrs. Holt stopped. She looked at the slate. She looked at Nell. Nell was waiting with the barely contained expression of a child who knows she has done something significant. That, Mrs. Holt announced, is the finest G I have seen all month. Nell's face broke open into a smile so pure and complete that several of the older children smiled reflexively in response, including 2 boys who had been competing to seem indifferent to everything. Abigail, standing at the back of the room, felt something move through her chest, warm and solid and real. This was hers, not the school, not the building, or the slates, or the arrangement with the vicar. Not the credit if credit was what anyone was keeping track of. The feeling, the knowledge that she had done something that mattered, that she had made a decision and followed it through, that the world had in some small way become different because she had put her attention and her effort into making it so. That was hers, and nobody had given it to her, and nobody could take it away. And she stood in that cold little room with the smell of chalk and wool and wood smoke all around her, and she was more herself than she had been in years. Lord Fairfax arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. He was exactly as described, a man of 50, solid and unhurried, with gray at his temples, and the kind of face that had been weathered pleasantly by time. He was not handsome in the way that had ever particularly occupied Abigail's attention, but there was something in his bearing that she registered immediately. He moved through a room as though he had nothing to prove in it. He came into the small parlor where she had arranged tea, took the chair she indicated, declined the offered footstool with an easy gesture, and looked at her with the direct and uncomplicated attention of a man who was actually interested in what she might say. Mrs. Mercer. His voice was warm, unhurried. Thank you for receiving me. I was not certain you would. I nearly didn't. She poured his tea without ceremony. I spent some time considering whether I was ready for social calls. And what did you conclude? That avoiding people because some of them might be complicated is not a very sustainable approach to living. He smiled at that, a real smile, she thought, not a performed one. I heard about the school. Lady Harrington is an efficient communicator. She is indeed. He accepted the cup. I have been told you convinced 3 landholders to contribute to the project who had previously shown no interest whatsoever in tenant education. 2 of them had daughters of school age themselves, Abigail said. Once I pointed that out, their resistance became somewhat less principled. He laughed. A genuine laugh, open and easy. And here was the thing Abigail noticed in that moment, with a sharpness she had not expected. The laugh did not make her ache the way Benjamin's laugh with Victoria had made her ache. She heard Lord Fairfax laugh, and she felt nothing complicated. A mild warmth. The uncomplicated pleasure of a good social exchange. It was pleasant. It was not a wound. She was not sure yet what that meant about anything. Lord Fairfax stayed for an hour and a half. They talked about the school, about Lincolnshire, about a book she had recently read on agricultural reform that she had been annotating in her margins, with growing impatience at several of the author's assumptions. He had read the same book. He disagreed with her about 2 of her objections, and agreed with 3 others, and the quality of his disagreement was the kind that made the conversation better rather than worse. He left when the light began to fail, shaking her hand with both of his, in the old-fashioned way, warm, sincere, unpretentious. "I hope you will permit me to call again," he told her at the door. "I think I would enjoy that," Abigail answered. And she would. She genuinely would. She watched his carriage go down the lane, and then stood for a moment in the doorway, breathing the cold January air, and thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Simple, clear, no performance required. She went inside. She did not think about Benjamin. Or rather, she thought about him briefly in the way you think about an old wound when the weather changes. A recognition, not a longing. Something that had healed enough to be identified without reopening. She sat down at the small writing desk in the parlor and picked up her current book, a volume on the history of women's property law that she had found in her father's library, and that had been making her increasingly incensed for 3 weeks, and she opened it to her marked page, and she read. That evening her mother asked how the visit had gone. "Very well," Abigail said. "He is a genuinely good man." "Will you see him again?" "Yes." Her mother poured herself a glass of port. "Good." She said nothing else. She did not need to. What reached Benjamin in February was not a letter from his solicitor, not a communication through channels, but something far more direct, and therefore far more difficult to manage, an invitation to the Harrington Winter Gathering, which he attended as a matter of social obligation, and at which Abigail was also present. He had not been told she would be there. I understood when he saw her across the room that this had been an arrangement that Lady Harrington, who managed the social world of the county with the invisible precision of someone who believed deeply in outcomes, had decided that this encounter should occur and had constructed the occasion to make it so. Abigail was standing near the fireplace with Lord Fairfax. She was wearing a dark green dress that Benjamin had never seen before. Her hair was different, less formally arranged than he was accustomed to, more like herself, somehow the way she had looked in the mornings before she became entirely careful. She was talking, and Lord Fairfax was listening, and her hands moved slightly when she made a point. A habit she had, a small expressiveness she used to suppress in company, because he had once years ago made a passing observation about it looking girlish. She had stopped doing it. She was doing it now. She had not seen him yet. He watched her for 30 seconds before someone claimed his attention, and those 30 seconds were the most unguarded he had been in months, because there was no performance available when you were simply watching someone be entirely fine without you. When the person you had damaged was visibly actually in some way that had nothing to do with his presence, or his forgiveness, or his return, simply fine. Lord Fairfax said something. Abigail laughed. Not his laugh, not the careful social laugh she had used at Ashford Estate events. Her real laugh, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes and lasted 2 seconds too long to be polite. Benjamin had not heard that laugh in 2 years. He had not noticed when it stopped. He had not noticed when he stopped saying things worth laughing at. He stood there in the Harrington drawing room and felt something he could not name at first, something that had the shape of jealousy, but was colder and deeper and less comfortable than jealousy usually was, because jealousy implied that he had a claim. And he was beginning to understand, with the slow and terrible clarity of a man who has been avoiding a realization for months, that he had spent 3 years giving up every claim he had, one choice at a time. He crossed the room. He had not planned to. His feet made the decision before his mind caught up with it. Abigail saw him coming, and her expression did not change. That was the devastating thing. She did not go cold or tense or brittle. She simply continued her conversation for the 2 more seconds it took to complete her thought, and then she turned to him with the same composed courtesy she would offer any acquaintance. Mr. Ashford. Not even Benjamin. Not her husband. A last name. A distance precise as a boundary marker. Abigail. He stopped. Lord Fairfax stood a foot to her left, watching with the careful neutrality of a man who understood exactly what he was witnessing. I didn't know you would be here. Lady Harrington extended an invitation. A pause. You look well. He did not look well. He knew he did not look well. He had not been sleeping properly for 6 weeks, and the estate felt enormous and wrong. But he was not about to say that in the Harrington drawing room to the wife he had failed, while the man she was replacing him with stood within earshot. You do too, he managed. You look different. Do I? She tilted her head slightly. No warmth, but no cruelty either. Perhaps. How are you? The question came out more raw than he intended, more genuinely desperate than a man in his social position was supposed to allow himself to be in public. She regarded him for a moment. I am very well, thank you. And he could see that she was. That was the part that leveled him. He had expected some trace of evidence, some sign that she was struggling. The way he was struggling, that the separation had cost her something visible. He had expected to find something he could point to and say, you need me. You are not actually fine. Come back. He had not examined this expectation clearly enough to recognize how unfair it was, but it had been there underneath everything, the unexamined assumption of a man who had always been returned to. There was nothing. She was genuinely well. I hear the school is going remarkably, he tried. It is. That was, I didn't know you had an interest in. There are many things about me you didn't know. Not cruel, just factual. The way a woman states geography. We were not particularly good at learning each other. Lord Fairfax excused himself quietly, with the tact of a genuinely considerate man. He murmured something about finding his host and stepped away, giving them 3 feet of semi-privacy in a crowded room. Benjamin watched him go, then looked back at Abigail. He seems very attentive. He is. Is it serious? She looked at him for a beat too long. Benjamin. Her voice was not unkind. You gave up the right to that question some time ago. His jaw tightened. You are still my wife. Legally. She did not flinch. Technically, on paper, we both know what I was in practice. That is not, I am not interested in relitigating the marriage at Lady Harrington's gathering. She said it with the firmness of a woman who has decided exactly how much of her energy a situation deserves and has allocated it accordingly. I hope you are well. I hope the estate is in order. I hold no ill will toward you. She paused. But I am not available to you. It hit him like a physical thing. Not the words themselves, but the tone, the complete settled absence of hope in it. Not anger, not hurt, not the trembling determination of someone who was barely holding together. Just clarity. The clarity of a woman who had already done the hardest part of the leaving months ago and had moved on to the life on the other side of it. Abigail, enjoy the evening. She touched his arm once briefly, the way you touch the arm of someone you wish well and do not need. It is good to see you looking healthy. And she turned back toward the room, toward the group she had been part of, before he crossed the floor, and within 30 seconds, she was talking again, really talking with her hands moving and her real laugh ready, and Benjamin stood alone in the middle of the Harrington drawing room, and understood with a force that actually required him to draw a breath, that she was not going to look back over her shoulder to see how he was taking it. She used to always look back. She always used to make sure he was all right before she attended to herself. She did not look back. He left the gathering early. He rode home in the cold February dark, and he went directly to his study and poured 2 fingers of brandy and stood at the window and drank it without sitting down. He thought about the moment years ago when Abigail had stopped moving her hands when she talked. He had not noticed it at the time. He had not noticed the specific moment when his passing observation had become her modification, when she had taken his carelessness into herself and changed for it. I thought about how many other things she had changed. How many versions of herself she had quietly put away to make herself easier for him. How small she had made herself, and how he had not even been paying enough attention to register that the shrinking was happening. He poured another finger. His solicitor had sent a memo last week about the formal separation arrangements. It was all entirely civil. Abigail's solicitor was professional and reasonable. There were no extraordinary demands, and Benjamin had read it and then put it in a drawer and not answered it, which was not a solution, but was all he could manage at the time. He went to the drawer. He took out the memo. He read it again. It detailed the terms with complete adequacy. The modest income from her family estate already technically hers. The arrangement regarding the personal items she had left at Ashford. The question of ongoing support, which she had not requested, and which her solicitor noted with neutral precision she did not intend to. She was not asking him for anything. That was the thing that kept catching him. She had left a wealthy man with an estate and a title, and an apparently endless supply of social options. She had left all of that, and she was not asking for anything in return, except to be left alone to run her school, and receive her callers, and read her annotated books in peace. She had not left angry. She had not left wanting. She had left because she was finished, and it occurred to him standing at his desk at 11 o'clock on a February night with the brandy glass in his hand, and the separation memo on the desk, that he had spent their entire marriage treating her love like a resource that would not run out, like a fire that would keep burning without fuel, like something so reliable that it required no tending, no acknowledgement, no reciprocal investment. He had spent years believing that Abigail would always be there, because Abigail had always been there. He had been wrong. And the wrongness of it, the sheer massive irrevocable wrongness, was not something he could argue with or talk around or smooth over with the practiced social ease that had gotten him through every other difficulty in his adult life. Because it was not other people's opinion of him that had been damaged. It was something real. It was something he had done. He sat down in his chair. The fire burned. The house was enormous and silent around him. He thought about Nell Briggs holding up her slate. He had heard that story. It had traveled as stories about Abigail seemed to travel these days, through the county, with the warm and affectionate speed of things that people want to repeat. He had heard it from Harrington, who had heard it from his wife, who had heard it from the vicar, who had apparently been present. He had heard about the child's face. He had heard Abigail described as someone who made people feel seen, who brought food and learned names and stayed until the thing was actually done. I thought about how he had made her feel. The thought arrived in full without the softening he had been applying to it for months. He held it in his mind without deflecting it. He had made her feel worthless, not in any single dramatic moment, not with any one action he could point to and say that was the thing, but in the accumulation, the daily repeated accumulation of choosing everything else first, the assumption that she was fine, the carelessness with her feelings, her time, her dignity, the women he had looked at while she was in the same room, the empty chair at dinner. The rumor she was too well-bred to acknowledge the perfume, she was too proud to mention the 47 days she counted, because it had been 47 days since he had looked at her like she mattered. He had done that. Nobody else. Not circumstance, not misunderstanding, not the pressures of managing an estate and a social position. Him. His choices. His neglect. His comfortable assumption that love once given freely would continue to be given freely regardless of how it was treated. Benjamin Ashford put his face in his hands. He sat like that for a long time. When he lifted his head, the fire had burned down to embers. He did not relight it. He picked up a fresh sheet of paper and a pen, and he sat for several minutes not writing anything. He did not know how to write the letter that was required. He had never written a letter like this one, that did not have the usual social architecture available to it. No pleasantries that weren't hollow. No claim of good intentions that wasn't immediately undermined by the evidence of the last 3 years. He wrote finally 3 sentences. I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing because I have been sitting in this study understanding things. I should have understood a great deal sooner, and I felt I could not leave them entirely unsaid. I am sorry, Abigail. Not for the separation. For the 3 years before it. He signed it with his name. He sealed it. He left it on his desk for 2 days before he sent it. Abigail received the letter on a Saturday when she had mud on her boots from visiting the northern tenant farms and chalk on her sleeve. From an afternoon she'd spent at the school working through arithmetic with a boy named Thomas, who was extraordinarily stubborn about the concept of fractions. She read it standing in the hallway. She read it again. She stood very still for a moment. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of her dress, and she went to wash her hands for dinner, and she sat down with her mother and ate the good soup the cook had made with that morning's vegetables, and she said nothing about the letter over dinner. She thought about it later alone in her room, holding it on her lap unfolded. 3 sentences. He had managed in 3 sentences to say something that 3 years of proximity had never produced. She did not know what to do with that. She was not ready to forgive him. She understood herself well enough to know that clearly. Forgiveness was not something she was anywhere near yet. Not because she was committed to withholding it, but because genuine forgiveness, the kind that is not merely a performance of virtue, required something from her that she did not yet have available. It required that the wound close enough to be forgiven. And it had been 4 months. The wound was still present, but something shifted very slightly in the fixed and settled way she had been thinking about Benjamin. Not toward him, not back, just toward something more complicated than simply finished. She did not write back that night. She put the letter in the drawer of her writing desk with her father's pen and her mother's old recipe cards, and the sketch that Nell Briggs had made of the schoolroom, slightly lopsided with everyone's names, carefully printed beneath the tiny figures. She left it there, and went to sleep. Spring came in increments that year. Cold March, giving way to a cautious April, the fields near Mercer Hall, softening from silver gray to something greener, the school growing from 8 students to 13, as word spread through the tenant community that Mrs. Mercer's school was real and permanent, and the children came home with something new every week. Lord Fairfax called again in March and in April and in May. Their conversations developed a comfortable depth. He told her about his children, 2 grown sons and a daughter who had married 3 years prior, and about the years after his wife's death, when he had managed the Lincolnshire estate alone and discovered that he was better at the human dimensions of it than the financial ones. He told her this without embarrassment, which she found disarming. She told him about the school. She told him about the books she was reading. She told him once carefully about the 3 years of her marriage, not in detail, not as a complaint, but honestly enough that he understood what it had cost her and what it had changed in her. He listened all the way through without offering explanations for Benjamin or advice about her choices. He simply listened, and when she finished, he said quietly that he was sorry she had lived through that. She found she believed him. She was not in love with Lord Fairfax. She thought with the particular honest clarity she had been cultivating since October that she might be in the future. That the conditions were right for something real. That he was the kind of man with whom real things were possible. But she was not there yet, and she was not pretending to be, and he seemed to understand and honor that without requiring her to be further along than she was. It was the most comfortable she had been in a relationship with a man since the early months of her marriage, when Benjamin was still someone who laughed with her. She thought about that sometimes. She carried it without letting it pull her backward. There was a day in late May when she came home from the school to find a package on the front step of Mercer Hall, a book wrapped in plain paper with a small card tucked under the string. The handwriting on the card was Benjamin's. She stood on the step for a moment, the book in her hands, and then she went inside and unwrapped it. It was a new volume on the history of women's charitable institutions in England, a recent publication just out from a London press with detailed documentation of successful programs for tenant and worker education. It was exactly the kind of book she had been wanting and had not yet located. The card said only, "I heard Mrs. Holt has expanded the curriculum to include geography. Well done." She set the book on her desk. She did not write back, but she did not send it back either. She opened it that evening because she wanted to read it, because it was exactly the book she needed, and because accepting a useful book from someone did not mean she owed them anything beyond the acknowledgement that they had made a good choice. She read until midnight with her feet tucked under her on the chair, annotating in the margins with small, precise handwriting. Her own copies, her own margins, her own life. And in the morning she woke early and walked to the school before Mrs. Holt arrived to open it. And she stood in the doorway of the little room that she had helped build out of nothing, and she breathed it in the smell of chalk and wood and possibility. And she thought, this is what I am. Not what she had been. Not what she had tried to become for someone else. What she actually genuinely entirely was. The morning light came through the window and landed on the empty slates waiting for the day's lessons. She was ready. The book sat on Abigail's desk for 3 weeks before she touched it again. Not because she had forgotten it was there. She was not the kind of woman who forgot things. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything and chose with considerable deliberateness what to do with what she noticed. The book from Benjamin stayed on the corner of her desk, and she was aware of it, the way you are aware of a door in a room that is not quite fully closed, not demanding your attention, but present in the peripheral vision of your mind. Lord Fairfax came in late May and stayed for dinner for the first time. Her mother was present, which made it entirely proper, and which her mother had clearly arranged with some precision, because her mother showed up to dinner in her best dress, and with her hair properly done, which she had not bothered with for 3 months, and Abigail understood the message without requiring it to be stated. The dinner was easy. Lord Fairfax and her mother discovered a shared opinion about the current state of agricultural reform legislation, and occupied themselves thoroughly for 40 minutes while Abigail ate her soup and felt with some astonishment that she was genuinely content. Not performing contentment. Not managing the appearance of it while quietly cataloging what was wrong. Actually content. When Lord Fairfax left, her mother cleared the dessert plates herself, another departure from normal practice, and carried them to the kitchen without commentary, leaving Abigail alone in the dining room with the last of the candlelight and the comfortable quiet. She sat for a while. She thought about what it meant that she had reached a point in her life where a dinner could be simply a dinner. No performance. No careful calibration of which version of herself was appropriate for the room. No watching the door to gauge his mood before deciding whether to speak. She was 31 years old, and she was learning for the first time in 3 years what her own evenings actually felt like. It felt, she thought, like breathing. The letter that arrived in the second week of June was not from Benjamin. It was from Victoria Beaumont. Abigail held the envelope for a long moment, looking at the handwriting neat, controlled the hand of a woman who had been expensively educated. She could have set it aside. She could have returned it unopened. No reasonable standard of social obligation required her to read correspondence from the woman who had been standing at her husband's elbow the night she removed the necklace. She opened it. Victoria's letter was 3 pages long. It was not, as Abigail had half expected, defensive. It was not an apology arranged to serve the writer's comfort while appearing to serve the recipient's. It was something more complicated than either a letter written. It seemed by a woman who had been thinking difficult thoughts and had reached the uncomfortable decision that they should be shared. Victoria wrote that she had not understood at the time of the ball the nature of what was occurring in Benjamin's marriage. She wrote this plainly without excessive qualification, which Abigail respected. She wrote that she had believed what Benjamin presented a man in a marriage that had grown distant through mutual incompatibility. A narrative that she understood now she had accepted too easily because it was convenient to accept. She wrote that in the months since she had watched Benjamin and what she had seen had altered her understanding considerably. The paragraph that made Abigail set the letter down and press her fingers briefly to her mouth was near the end. Victoria had written, "I think you should know that he does not speak of you carelessly. When your name arises, and it arises frequently, in ways I suspect he does not entirely intend, he speaks of you with an expression I can only describe as someone realizing they have left something irreplaceable behind in a burning building. I am not telling you this to influence your decisions. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know that the man who did not defend you at that ball is not the only version of him that exists. Though I understand entirely if that knowledge changes nothing." The letter was signed with Victoria's full name, no flourish. Abigail sat at her writing desk for a very long time. She did not know what to do with Victoria Beaumont's honesty. It was not something she had been prepared for. She had constructed quite reasonably a working model of Victoria as a comfortable villain in the narrative, not monstrous, not truly malicious, but a convenient object of the anger that had nowhere else to land. Victoria's letter dismantled that model with the particular efficiency of a person who refuses to play the role assigned to them. Abigail folded the letter and put it with Benjamin's in the drawer. The drawer was getting complicated. It was a Tuesday in late June when Benjamin appeared at Mercer Hall without announcement. She was in the garden when the footman came to tell her. She was on her knees, which was not the position she would have chosen for this encounter, wearing a stained canvas apron, her hair escaping its pins in multiple locations, dirt on both her hands. She had been helping the garden boy replant the kitchen beds. Because Will had thrown his back, doing something she had specifically asked him not to do with the heavy soil buckets, and someone had to do it, and she had decided that someone was her. She stood up. She removed the apron. She did not attempt to fix her hair. She walked around the side of the house to the front, and there was Benjamin standing by the gate with his hat in his hands, which was the first time she could remember seeing him stand anywhere with his hat actually in his hands, rather than on his head or handed to a footman. He looked different, not ill. She had told him he looked well at the Harrington gathering, which had been a social courtesy, and they both knew it. He had not looked well at the Harrington gathering. He had looked like a man managing something significant and not managing it particularly gracefully. Now, standing at her gate in June, she searched for the word quieter. Like something loud in him had been turned down. "I should have written first," he said immediately. "No preamble. I know. I almost did 4 times. I kept not sending the letters." "Why?" "Because they weren't right. None of them said—" He stopped, looked at his hat, looked back at her. "I didn't know how to write what I actually needed to say." Abigail considered him for a moment. "You might as well come in." She led him to the small parlor, not the formal drawing room, not Benjamin's territory, her own room with her books on the table, and her current project spread across the writing desk and the faint smell of the garden coming through the open window. She did not tidy it. She was not going to tidy her own parlor because Benjamin Ashford had arrived without warning. She sat in her usual chair. He sat across from her and did not immediately speak. She found she could wait. She had become over the past 8 months, very comfortable with silence. She had stopped filling it, reflexively, stopped offering words to smooth over discomfort that other people needed to sit with. Benjamin said finally, "I went to see the school." That was not what she had expected him to open with. Last week, I drove out. I didn't go inside. That seemed I wasn't sure what that would seem like. But I sat in the lane for a while, and I watched through the window. You were in there, with the children." A pause. "I could hear them laughing." Abigail was quiet. "There was a girl," he went on. "Small, red hair. She came out the door when the lesson ended and she ran directly to a woman waiting in the lane, her mother, I suppose, and she held up this slate, and the woman started crying." He looked at his hands. "I watched a woman cry in a lane because her daughter had learned to write her name. And I sat in my carriage and I thought about you. About the version of you that I never—" He stopped again. "Never what? Never made room for." The words came out like something that had been held under pressure for a long time. "You were doing this thing, this whole enormous real thing, and I never once asked you what you cared about. I never asked what you were interested in. I never—" He pressed his hand flat against his knee. "I was married to you for 3 years, and I had no idea you could do this." "You had no idea," Abigail said carefully, "because you did not look." "I know. You did not look because you were not interested in looking. I know that too." He did not flinch from it. That surprised her. She had braced for deflection for the managed response, the social smooth-over, the careful reframe that had characterized every difficult conversation of their marriage. It did not come. "I am not here to argue the facts of it, Abigail. I am not here to renegotiate what happened. He looked at her directly, and the expression on his face was something she did not have a name for immediately, and then she did. It was the face of someone who has stopped pretending. "I needed to see you. I needed to say to your face that I understand what I did. Not the general shape of it, the actual specific weight of it. And what do you understand specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. "I understand." he said slowly, working through it as though he was still arriving at the words as he spoke them. That every time I came home smelling of someone else, and you did not say anything that wasn't you accepting it. That was you spending another piece of something that was already running out. A breath. I understand that the dinners you ate alone, I told myself that was you being difficult, that you were choosing solitude to punish me for something. It wasn't that, was it? It was not quite a question. No, Abigail said. It wasn't. You ate alone because I didn't come. Yes. And you got up the next morning and arranged your face and went through another day and never said a word to anyone because you were protecting. He stopped. What were you protecting exactly? Me, my reputation, the marriage. Her voice was even. I was protecting what I still believed might be left of it, for longer than was reasonable. She paused. And then I was protecting myself, because at a certain point speaking the truth of it to anyone would have required me to acknowledge that it was real, and I was not ready to do that. How long were you not ready? About 2 years longer than I should have been. The silence that followed was the most honest silence they had shared in the entirety of their marriage. Benjamin put his face in his hands briefly, the same gesture he had made at his desk in February alone at midnight. But this time he did it in front of her with no audience management available, and when he lifted his head, his eyes were red at the edges, and he did not attempt to conceal it. I made you feel worthless, he said. A woman who built a school out of nothing, who walks into a village and learns every person's name, who... He broke off. I made you feel like you were not enough. When you were Abigail, you were everything. You were the only person in my life who knew me and stayed anyway. And I did not. You didn't value what you couldn't lose, she said quietly. You never believed you could lose me. The accuracy of it landed in the room between them like something placed on a table. No, he said. I didn't. And now? He looked at her steadily. And now I know exactly what I lost. And I do not have a single rational argument for why you should give me the chance to prove that I understand it. She looked at him. The man who had stood in that ballroom and not defended her. The man who had given her a necklace on their wedding day and spent 3 years making her wish she'd never worn it. The man who had driven out to sit in a lane and watch a child learn to write her name, and somehow found in that small moment the thing he had been too careless to find in 3 years of marriage. Benjamin. She said his name the way you say something you need to be careful with. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Not the answer you think I need, the honest one. Yes. Why did you come here today? What do you actually want? He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was choosing honesty over ease. I want to know you, he said. The version of you that exists now. The version that was always there, and that I want to know who you actually are. I don't know if that is something you can give me. I don't know if it is something you should give me. But it is the truth of why I am here. Abigail sat with that. Outside. Will the garden boy could be heard having a loud disagreement with the garden itself, something falling over, followed by 14-year-old language that was technically inappropriate, but that Abigail had quietly given up disciplining because Will's commentary on the world was she had decided one of life's genuine pleasures. The noise broke the weight of the room in a way that felt almost deliberate. A corner of Abigail's mouth moved involuntarily. Benjamin saw it. And something in his expression shifted not toward hope exactly, toward something more careful than hope. Recognition. Lord Fairfax, he said quietly, not accusatory, just present, acknowledging what was real. He is a good man. I know. A beat. Better than I have been. That is not a difficult standard to clear at the moment. He accepted that without visible pain, which told her something. She said, I am not going to tell you what you want to hear, Benjamin. I am not going to say that I am willing to try again, because I genuinely do not know if I am. I do not know if what we had is something that can be rebuilt, or whether what we had was never actually built correctly to begin with, and has nowhere to return to. I'm not asking you to say that. What are you asking? Nothing yet. He looked at her. I am asking for nothing yet. I came to say what I said, that's all. I'm not... He shook his head. I am not here to negotiate. I am not here to make a case. I made the choices I made for 3 years, and you are sitting in your own parlor with mud on your sleeve. From a garden you planted yourself, and a school you built yourself, and a life that is Abigail. It is a good life. It is a better life. I am not here to disrupt that. She looked at him for a long moment. Then what happens now? I go home, he said simply. And you continue what you are doing. And I try to become someone who deserves to be in the same room as you, without it costing you something. She did not say anything for a while. You should know, she said finally carefully, that I received a letter from Victoria Beaumont. His expression went very still. She was honest, more honest than I expected. Abigail watched his face. She told me how you speak of me. The stillness deepened. I didn't know she was going to write to you, he said. No, I thought not. A pause. It was not what I expected her to say. What did you expect her to say? I'm not sure. Something that would have been easier to dismiss. The air between them was different now, not less honest, but more layered, more complicated. The kind of complicated that is not chaos, but rather the texture of something real. Something that has more than one dimension and does not resolve simply. Benjamin stood eventually. He picked up his hat from the table where he had set it. He looked around the parlor at the books, the writing desk, the current project spread across it, the way the room was entirely itself, entirely hers. The margins, he said quietly, almost to himself. What? He looked at her. Your books, the annotations in the margins. I told you once it looked girlish. I have thought about that many times this year. A pause. It was one of them about you, and I told you it was wrong. Abigail was very still. You stopped doing it, he said. At dinner parties. You stopped moving your hands when you talked. I noticed it at the Harrington gathering in February. You were doing it again, and I recognized it, and I understood that you had stopped doing it before, because of something I said, and I... He stopped. I am sorry for every specific thing, Abigail. Not the general shape of the failure. Every specific thing. She stood. They were the same height. She had always been. Nearly his height, which had struck her as wonderful at 27, and which Benjamin had treated as unremarkable, which had disappointed her more than she'd admitted. Go home, Benjamin, she said. Not cruel, not cold. He nodded. He moved to the door. The school. He stopped, not turning around. Is there anything it needs? Anything practical I can? We need a larger stove for winter, she said, before she had entirely decided to say it. The current one is insufficient for the room. He turned then. His expression was contained, but something underneath it was moving. I will arrange it. I am not asking for... I know you're not. Steady. I know. He left. She stood in the middle of her parlor and listened to the sound of his carriage leaving the lane, and she did not go to the window to watch it go. That was different from October. In October she had not gone to the window because she was done watching. Now she did not go because she was simply staying in her own room, in her own center of gravity, and letting the world move at its own pace around her. The stove arrived 3 days later. 2 men from a reputable supplier in York, a letter of instruction, and a stove considerably finer than what the school required, though not so extravagant as to be an imposition. Practical. Thoughtful. Sized exactly right for the room. Mrs. Holt walked around it twice and announced it was the best stove she had seen outside a large kitchen. Abigail wrote a formal receipt of acknowledgement and sent it to Ashford Estate, signed with her name. She did not add anything personal. But she did not add anything personal because she wanted to keep her distance. She did it because she was still deciding. She was allowing herself to still be deciding, and she was not going to accelerate the process to ease anyone's discomfort, not Benjamin's, and not her own. Lord Fairfax came in July. They walked in the afternoon along the lane near Mercer Hall, which had become a comfortable habit. He had a measured, unhurried way of walking that matched well with the way she had learned to move through the world since October. They talked about his daughter, who had written with news of a second pregnancy. They talked about a proposal Abigail was developing to expand the school's hours, and whether a second teacher might be sustainable. He did not ask about Benjamin. She had not told him about the visit in June. Then he said quietly, without looking at her, "Something has shifted." She considered denying it. "He came to see me," she said instead. "In June." Lord Fairfax walked for a few steps without responding. And he said things I did not expect him to say. Things that were actually true, which was more surprising than I anticipated. She paused. "I don't know what I am doing with it. I am being honest with you." "I know you are." He stopped walking. "Abigail." His voice was the same warm, unhurried voice as always. "I want to ask you something." She turned to look at him. "Do you still love him?" The question arrived with the force of something that had been present for months without being spoken, and she felt it land somewhere in the center of her chest. She did not answer immediately. She thought about the necklace going cold. She thought about the empty dinner chair the 47 days. She thought about standing at the gate with mud on her sleeve and seeing a man who had finally run out of excuses to be someone other than himself. "I don't know," she said. Honest, complete. "I know that I am not the woman who left him in October. I know that the Abigail who would have forgiven him and returned immediately. She doesn't exist anymore. I don't grieve her. But I don't know what I feel now. It is not what it was. I don't know yet what it is." Lord Fairfax looked at her for a long moment. His expression was not hurt exactly, more like the face of a man who has been prepared for something and found on meeting it that he was actually prepared. "That is a fair answer," he said. "It is the only honest one. I know." He looked out at the lane. "I want you to know that I am not. I will not pretend this is a simple thing to hear. But I am not going to ask you to resolve your feelings faster than they resolve. That has never been what I wanted from you." "I know," she said quietly. "That is one of the things I value most about you." He looked at her with the particular expression of someone who understands that being valued is not the same as being chosen, and who has decided with quiet dignity to accept the distinction. "I think," he said, "that whatever you decide about any of it, it should be decided from the place you are in right now. Not from who you were with him, not from who you might need to become for me. From the woman standing in this lane who built a school and learned that her own opinion was worth having." Abigail felt the back of her throat tighten. "That is a very generous thing to say. It is also a very practical thing." A gentle, brief smile. "I am too old to want anything less than someone who genuinely chooses to be there." They walked back in comfortable silence that was not awkward, but was honestly sad. The particular sadness of two people who respect each other enough to tell the truth, even when the truth does not give anyone what they want. The letter from Benjamin came in August. Not 3 sentences this time. 6 pages written in the careful hand of someone who had clearly started and started again, because some of the ink was lighter and some of the paragraphs ended abruptly and resumed in slightly different phrasing. He wrote about the estate. Not the finances, the people. He wrote about the tenant family on the North Field, whose son had been ill, and how he had gone to see them, which he had never done in 3 years of managing the estate, and how the mother had looked at him with an expression he had not known how to interpret at first, and had eventually understood was simple surprise that he had come at all. He wrote about a conversation he'd had with his solicitor. Not about the separation, but about a proposed donation to the county school system that Abigail's project had apparently influenced, and how during this conversation he had caught himself thinking about what she would have said about the proposal's specific weaknesses. He wrote, "I find I am constantly noticing what I think you would notice. I realize now that this is because you were always noticing these things, and I was not listening. I am trying to understand what it means to listen. I find it is more difficult than I expected, and more necessary than I would have admitted a year ago." He wrote near the end in ink that was slightly darker. The hand of someone who had made a decision about something. "I do not write this expecting anything. I write it because I promised you honesty, and because I am trying to practice being someone who does what he promises, which is something I was not. I understand if these letters are unwelcome. You may tell me so, and I will stop. But I find that being honest with you is the only thing I have done in the last year that did not feel hollow, and I am not ready to stop doing the one thing that does not feel hollow. Abigail sat at her desk for a long time. She opened the drawer. She took out the letter from February, the 3 sentences. She set it next to the 6-page letter. She took out Victoria Beaumont's letter and set it with the others. She sat and looked at them. She thought about Lord Fairfax on the lane with his quiet dignity and his absolute unwillingness to ask her to be less than honest. She thought about the stove in the schoolroom. She thought about Benjamin sitting in his carriage in a lane watching through a window as a child held up a slate. She thought about Nell Briggs and her entire name written in uneven letters and Mrs. Holt's voice saying, "That is the finest G I have seen all month," and the way the room had shifted on the strength of one small genuine accomplishment. She picked up her pen. She wrote 4 words. "You may keep writing." She sealed it before she could think about it further. She handed it to the footman. She went to the school. She spent the rest of the afternoon working with Thomas on his fractions. Stubborn, brilliant Thomas, who refused to understand why a thing could be divided and still exist, which Abigail privately thought was not entirely an unreasonable philosophical position. She did not think about what she had sent. Or rather, she thought about it the way you think about a door you have decided to leave open. Not wide open. Not an invitation. Just not locked. The afternoon light came through the schoolroom window and fell across the children's faces, and Abigail Mercer sat among them and taught, and outside the summer moved through its last long days, unhurried, unconcerned with anyone's decisions, indifferent and beautiful as it always was. The stove gleamed in the corner, entirely practical, exactly right for the room. 4 words. "You may keep writing." Benjamin read them standing in the entrance hall of Ashford Estate, still in his riding coat. The footman who had brought the letter still waiting 3 feet away for instruction. He read them once. He read them again. He folded the paper carefully and put it in the interior pocket of his coat against his chest and told the footman he could go. He stood alone in the entrance hall for a long moment. He did not feel relief exactly. He did not feel hope exactly. What he felt was something more sober than either. A recognition that 4 words were 4 words, and that a door left open was not the same as a welcome, and that whatever this was, it was the most fragile thing he had ever been trusted with, and he was going to treat it accordingly. He went to his study. He sat down. He did not write back that day. He waited 2 days, and when he wrote carefully, not performing carefulness, actually exercising it. He wrote about the Tennant family he had visited again, the son who was recovering. The way the mother had started talking to him differently, with less wariness after the second visit. He wrote that he had instructed his steward to review the conditions of all the estate cottages, and produce a report which had apparently startled the steward considerably, because it was not the kind of instruction he had ever received from Benjamin before. He wrote nothing about their marriage, nothing about his feelings, nothing that required her to respond to anything more than what he had offered. He signed it simply B. She wrote back in 5 days. 2 paragraphs. Thomas had finally conceded the logic of fractions under protest. The vicar had proposed expanding the school to include adult reading lessons on Tuesday evenings, and she was considering it. The new stove performed excellently. She signed it A. That was all. It was more than enough. September arrived, and the letters continued, not daily, not overwhelming, but steady. A rhythm. The rhythm of 2 people who were learning something about each other through the careful medium of paper, which allowed for honesty, without the pressure of immediate response, without the social management that had always gotten in the way of anything real between them. Benjamin wrote about the mill investment he had abandoned. He had reviewed it more carefully in August and found that the projected returns depended on labor conditions he was not comfortable with, and he had withdrawn from the consortium. He wrote that this decision had cost him 2 friendships of the professional variety and a degree of social standing in certain business circles, and that he found to his own surprise that he minded considerably less than he would have expected. Abigail wrote back, "I find that the things we expect to mind, we often do not, and the things we expect not to mind are the ones that undo us." He kept that letter separate from the others. There was a Tuesday evening in late September when he attended a dinner at the Pembroke estate the first significant social engagement he had accepted since the winter. He arrived alone, which raised eyebrows, because Benjamin Ashford alone at dinner was a newer phenomenon than the county had quite absorbed. Victoria Beaumont was not there. The widow from London was not there. There was a young woman from Suffolk with a notable laugh who smiled at him across the table with unmistakable interest, and he smiled back with the automatic politeness of a man who is no longer available in the way that used to be assumed, and who has not yet figured out how to make this legible without a formal announcement. After dinner, he found himself on the terrace with Harrington, who was one of the few men in the county whose company he genuinely valued. "You're different," Harrington observed with the bluntness of old friendship. "People keep saying that. Because it's visible." Harrington looked out at the grounds. "What happened?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment. "I understood something. About Abigail. About myself." He paused. "About who I was when I was with her, and who I was pretending to be." Harrington was quiet. "She's not coming back, is she?" It was not quite a question. "I don't know." Benjamin turned the glass in his hand. I'm not trying to get her back. I'm trying to..." He stopped, because this was harder to articulate than he wanted. "I'm trying to become someone who deserves to have that question still open. That's all." Harrington was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's more honest than most men manage in a lifetime." "I wasted a considerable amount of time not managing it." "Yes, you did." Harrington said it the way good friends say true things without cushioning, without cruelty. "But you're managing it now." Benjamin nodded. He looked up at the sky, the particular September dark that had something autumnal in it, a change of quality he could feel without being able to name it exactly. He thought about Abigail at her desk, writing in the margins of her books. He thought about the child in the lane with the slate. He thought about 4 words folded against his chest. He said nothing else. They stood together in the dark for a while, which was enough. The twist arrived in October, not from the direction he was watching. He had been so focused on Abigail, on the letters, on the careful calibration of distance and honesty, on the gradual and fragile thing being constructed between them, that he was not prepared for the conversation that happened in Lady Harrington's drawing room on the first Saturday of October, exactly 1 year after the night of the ball. Lady Harrington asked to see him privately. That alone was unusual. Lady Harrington managed events and people and information with the invisible precision of a woman who understood power without ever needing to announce it. She did not usually require private conversations. When she did, the content was invariably significant. She sat across from him in a small sitting room off the main drawing room, closed the door, and looked at him with the direct appraising eye of someone who has decided to say something and is simply deciding the best way to begin. "Lord Fairfax," she said, "has asked my opinion on a matter." Benjamin kept his expression neutral. "He is considering making a formal proposal to Abigail." The words landed in the room and stayed there. "He asked your opinion." Benjamin's voice was careful. "Why yours?" "Because he is a man of genuine consideration, and he understands that a proposal would affect more than 2 people. He wanted to understand the landscape before he proceeded." Lady Harrington folded her hands. "I am telling you this because I believe you deserve to know it. Not because I am asking you to do anything with the information." "What does Abigail?" "I don't know what she will say. I don't think she knows yet either. That is precisely why Lord Fairfax is proceeding carefully." A pause. "He is a very good man, Benjamin." "I know he is. The admission cost something, and he made it anyway." "I know. He would make her genuinely happy. The uncomplicated kind of happy that doesn't require her to fight for anything." "I know that too." Lady Harrington looked at him steadily. "Then I will ask you directly, which I find is always more efficient. What are you prepared to do, not say, do?" The question sat between them like something that had been waiting for the right moment to be asked. Benjamin was quiet for long enough that Lady Harrington did not press him, which was itself a form of respect. "I don't know," he said finally. It was the most honest answer he had. "That," Lady Harrington said quietly, is the first unmanaged answer I have heard from you in 20 years of acquaintance." She paused. "I find I respect it considerably." He drove home in the October dark. The same October dark as a year ago. The same roads, different man. And he sat in his carriage and he thought about Abigail Mercer in her parlor with her annotated books and her school and her life that was genuinely actually completely hers. He thought about Lord Fairfax, who walked through rooms as though he had nothing to prove, who listened to a woman speak, and did not wait for the pause in which to insert his own priority. "I thought she deserves that. She deserves exactly that." And then underneath it with the honesty he had been practicing for 12 months, "And I want to be the man who gives it to her." Not because he wanted to win. Not because she was a possession he had misplaced and wished to reclaim. But because the year of watching her live through letters and brief encounters, and the second-hand accounts that reached him through Lady Harrington and the vicar's communiques, and the county's general astonished affection for the woman who had built a school out of determination and sheer force of caring, had taught him something he had never understood inside the marriage. She was extraordinary. Not in spite of the qualities he had disregarded. Because of them. Because she noticed people. Because she moved her hands when she talked. Because she annotated her books and ate alone rather than pretend, and walked away from a ballroom with no dramatics, and built something real in the space where she had been. He had spent 3 years being given access to the most remarkable person he had ever known, and he had spent it looking out every other window. I was not going to make that argument to her. He was not going to appear at her gate with the year of change and say, "Look, now choose me." I was not going to make this about what he deserved or had earned because he had not earned anything yet. But he was also not going to disappear. He wrote a letter that night, not the careful, measured letters of the last months, but something more direct. Something that said what it meant. "I have heard something tonight that has clarified a great many things for me. I am not writing to claim anything, or to ask for anything that is not freely offered. I am writing because I promised you honesty, and I intend to honor that. I have spent this year learning things about myself that I should have learned before I ever asked you to marry me. I have no right to the time that cost you. But I want you to know, not as a negotiation, not as a plea, simply as the truth. I am in love with who you are. I have been, I think, for longer than I was capable of showing it. And if Lord Fairfax makes you happy in the way that you deserve to be happy, then I will carry this knowledge quietly, and it will be mine to carry. But if there is any part of you that is still deciding, I am asking you to know that I am not the same man who stood in that ballroom and did not defend you. I cannot prove that in a letter. I understand that. But I am asking you to know it." He sealed it. He held it in his hands for a long moment. He sent it. Abigail received the letter on a Wednesday morning. She read it at her desk twice with complete stillness. Then she put it down and sat for 10 minutes without moving. Her mother knocked on the parlor door and came in with 2 cups of tea, saw Abigail's face, and set both cups on the table without a word. She sat in the chair across from the desk. She waited. "Benjamin wrote something," Abigail said finally. "Something different from before." "Yes." She picked up the letter and set it down again. "Lord Fairfax is going to propose." Her mother was quiet. "How do you know?" "Because Lady Harrington told Benjamin and Benjamin told me, and Lady Harrington tells people things when she wants them to respond to those things." Abigail looked at her mother. She is either trying to force a decision, or she believes a decision is overdue. "And is it?" Abigail was quiet. "I don't know which one to trust," she said. "That is the honest answer. Lord Fairfax has never made me feel invisible. He has never made me question whether I was interesting or worthy or worth defending. He has been exactly what he appears to be, which is not a small thing. And Benjamin broke something." The words came without drama, simply present. He broke something, and he has spent 12 months trying to understand what he broke and how he broke it, which is more than I expected from him and more than most people manage. But broken things. She stopped. "I don't know if broken things go back together the same way." Her mother picked up her teacup. "They don't," she said. "They go back together differently. Whether differently is better or worse depends on what was wrong with the original." Abigail looked at her. "A great deal was wrong with the original," she said carefully. "Yes." Her mother was unruffled. "But some things were right, or you would not have married him, and you were not at 28 a foolish woman." Abigail thought about the Harrington Assembly, about a young man who had laughed openly and asked her questions and listened to her answers with the attention of someone who found her genuinely interesting. About the early months of the marriage before the distancing began, when she had been happy with a happiness that was real and not performed. She thought about where that man had gone. She thought about whether the man writing letters from Ashford Estate, in careful, honest, unmanaged sentences, was the same man or a different one. She thought, "I don't know." That is still the most honest answer. She wrote back to Benjamin that evening. Not the 4 words of August, not the 2 careful paragraphs of autumn. Something longer. Something that she read through twice before she sealed it. Something that said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it the way you have been answering things this year, without management, without what you think I need to hear. I need you to tell me, what was it in the beginning? What were you chasing when you were chasing everyone else? Because I have spent a year trying to understand this, and I cannot get to any of the rest of it until I understand that." She gave it to the footman. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and did not sleep easily, which told her something about where she actually was, underneath the clarity she had been practicing. His answer came in 3 days faster than usual, which told her he had not deliberated long, which told her the answer was one he had already found before she asked for it. "I was chasing the feeling of being wanted by someone I had not yet won. I don't know when I learned to need that particular feeling of being pursued, in reverse, of being the thing someone was trying to reach. I think I learned it early, before we ever met, and I brought it into our marriage like a habit so practiced, I did not know it was a habit. You loved me without needing to be pursued by me. You were simply there completely without conditions. And instead of that feeling like the most precious thing anyone had ever given me, I experienced it as an ending. As if the wanting was the point, and the having was where the interest died. I am ashamed of this. I am writing it anyway, because you asked me to be honest, and because I think you deserve to know what you were actually dealing with. You were not lacking. You were not insufficient. You were not the problem. I was a man who had confused the pursuit for the substance and did not know how to be present once the pursuing stopped. The answer to your question is, I was chasing the feeling of being incomplete, because being complete with you required me to actually be there. And I was afraid of that. I did not know I was afraid. I do now." Abigail read that letter, standing in the kitchen, still in her morning dress, because the footman had caught her on her way to breakfast, and she had opened it immediately because she could not wait. She read it through once. She set it on the kitchen table. She poured her tea. She read it again. The cook moved around her with the tactful invisibility of a woman who has worked in households long enough to know when to be furniture, and Abigail sat at the kitchen table. Not her desk, not the parlor. The kitchen with its warmth and its smell of bread, and its completely unperformed ordinariness. And she held her cup in both hands, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Compassion. Not the exhausted survival mode. Compassion of a woman trying to keep herself together while she loved someone who kept choosing other things. Something cleaner. The compassion of sufficient distance of a woman who had spent a year becoming entirely herself again, and who could now look at the man who had failed her and see without the wound of it, obscuring everything, a human being who had been broken in a specific way, and had spent a year cracking himself open to find out how. She did not confuse compassion with forgiveness. She did not confuse it with trust. But she held it in her hands, the way she held the teacup, and she let it be what it was. Lord Fairfax came on a Friday in late October. He arrived at the usual time in the usual way, and there was nothing in his manner to indicate that this visit was different. But Abigail knew it was different, because Lady Harrington had arranged for her to know, which meant that Abigail had had 10 days to decide what she felt before the question was officially asked. She had not wasted them. They walked along the lane as had become their habit. The trees were turning, and the air had that quality she associated with the best part of autumn, clear and cold and honest with no softening. He was quiet for longer than usual. Then, Abigail, I want to speak plainly. Please. I believe you know what I intend to ask. I am not going to pretend I don't know that Lady Harrington has facilitated awareness. A small dry note in his voice. She is consistent at least. She is. I want to ask you to be my wife. I want to tell you that I believe we could build something genuine together, not comfortable in the small sense, but actually good. The kind of life that is built between two people who respect each other and choose each other without reservation. Abigail walked 2 more steps before she stopped. She turned to face him. He was looking at her with complete steadiness. No performance, no calculation. The face of a man who was entirely present in the moment he was in. You are, she said carefully, one of the finest people I have known. Something moved across his expression. Not hope, he was past hope in the direction of clear-sightedness. But, I do not know yet, she said. And I am not going to say yes to a proposal I do not know the answer to, because you deserve a yes that is entirely yes. Not a yes that is partly yes, and partly because I am afraid of something else, or because it is the simpler choice, or because... She stopped. You told me once that you only wanted someone who chose to be there. I am holding you to that. I know what I said. Then you know that I cannot answer you today. I was quiet for a long moment. The October air moved between them. Benjamin wrote to you, he said. Something different. Yes. And you don't know. I genuinely don't know. She looked at him directly. I know that is not what you want to hear. I know it is not simple. I know I owe you more than uncertainty. You owe me honesty, he said firmly. Which is what you are giving me, and it is the only thing I would accept anyway. He looked down at the road for a moment. When he looked back up, his expression was resolved, not happy, but resolved. I am going to give you time. Not unlimited time. I am 50 years old, and I am not able to be in suspension indefinitely. But I am going to give you the autumn. That is generous. It is practical. The slight smile she had come to value. I would rather have a true answer in 3 months than a convenient answer today. She touched his arm briefly with gratitude that had no performance in it. Thank you. He covered her hand with his for a moment. Then he released it. They walked back without speaking much, and the silence had the quality of something being honored rather than avoided. She went home and sat in her parlor for a long time. She opened the drawer. All the letters were there. Benjamin's 3 sentences in February, the 6 pages of August, the letter about the mill, the letter about fear and pursuit and incompleteness, Victoria's 3 pages. The notes that had built themselves into a correspondence over the months, the careful B and A at the bottom of each one, the small accumulation of a man learning to tell the truth. She took them out, all of them, and spread them on the desk. She read them in order. She had not done this before, read them in sequence the way you read a story to understand its arc rather than its individual moments. She read from February through to the most recent letter, and what she saw in the progression was something she had not seen clearly from inside each individual exchange. She saw a man dismantling himself, not performing dismantlement, not narrating a journey of growth for her benefit, actually doing the things slowly, imperfectly, with visible effort and occasional backsliding, finding the specific architecture of his own failure and examining each piece. It was not a love letter. It was a year of receipts. She sat back in her chair. She thought, I am not the woman who left in October. She thought, and he is not entirely the man who made me leave. She thought, I do not know if that is enough. She did not know. She was going to have to find out. She wrote to Benjamin the next morning. Not a long letter. Not the careful, measured correspondence of autumn. Something direct. I need to see you. Not at a social gathering. Not with Lady Harrington managing the occasion. At your estate if you are willing. I have some things I need to say to your face because some things should not be said on paper. Tell me when. She did not agonize over it. She gave it to the footman. She walked to the school. Mrs. Holt had taken ill overnight and sent word, which meant Abigail was teaching the full morning herself, which she had done several times now, and which she found she was better at than she had initially expected, because she had always had opinions about how things should be explained. And it turned out that having opinions about explanations was most of what teaching required. Thomas was present and already had his fractions slate-ready positioned with the confidence of a child who has cracked something and is prepared to demonstrate comprehensively that he has cracked it. Abigail sat down at the front of the room. 8 faces looked at her. Nell Briggs in the front with her whole name committed to memory, and her enormous handwriting, and her absolute faith that whatever happened in this room was going to be interesting and worth her attention. Abigail looked back at them. She thought, this is mine. Whatever else is uncertain, this is not. She picked up the chalk. Right, she said. Thomas has something to show us first. Thomas stood up with the energy of a person who has been waiting for this exact moment. The lesson began. Outside October moved through its last clear days, the light sharp and final. The way October light always was, as though the year was trying to see everything clearly before it had to let it go. Benjamin received her letter at noon. He wrote back in an hour. Come whenever you choose. I will be here. He put the pen down. He looked at the entrance hall, the hall where he had received her 4 words in August, standing in his riding coat, the footman waiting. He thought about what was coming. He was afraid. He was more afraid than he had been of anything in his adult life, not of what she might say, not of the outcome, but of sitting across from her and being fully present in it, being unable to manage the moment, being required to simply be there entirely with no exit available and no practiced ease to fall back on. He was afraid, and he was ready. Those 2 things were not in conflict. He waited. She arrived on a Thursday, not announced by letter the day before, not with the ceremonial preparation of a formal visit. She simply came the way a woman comes when she has made a decision about how she wants to enter a room and does not want the room rearranged for her benefit first. Her carriage came up the Ashford Drive in the late morning, and when the footman opened the door, she stepped down without waiting for assistance, straightened her coat, and walked to the front entrance. Benjamin was in his study when they told him. He stood up too fast, knocked his pen off the desk, left it on the floor, and walked to the entrance hall with the particular controlled speed of a man who is trying very hard not to run. She was already inside. She looked the same. She looked entirely different. Both things were true simultaneously in the way that things are true when a year has passed, and the person in front of you has grown so completely into themselves that the sameness and the difference are inseparable. She wore a deep brown traveling coat he had not seen before. Her hair was pinned simply. She carried nothing but her gloves, which she was already removing and folding in her hands, the way she always had that particular Abigail gesture, the folding of gloves that meant she was thinking. She looked at him. He looked at her. The footman dissolved somewhere behind them. You came, Benjamin said. There was nothing managed in it, nothing performed, just those 2 words with all their weight. I said I would. She looked around the entrance hall briefly, not with the look of someone surveying property, but with the look of someone taking stock of something they once knew well and are measuring for changes. I need tea first, and then we are going to talk properly. Yes. He moved toward the drawing room. Not the drawing room. She said it without hesitation. Your study, where you actually are. He stopped, turned. The instruction landed in him as both a recognition and a question. She knew which room was his actual room, his unperformed room, the one where things were real rather than arranged. She had always known. He had simply never registered that she knew. He led her to the study. The study was not prepared for visitors. The desk had his current correspondence spread across it, one drawer half open, where he'd been looking for a document an hour before 2 empty cups from this morning stacked near the window, a book open face down on the chair by the fire, because he had left it mid-chapter when the steward came. He started to tidy instinctively. Leave it. She sat in the chair across from the desk, not her old chair by the window, his chair, the one that faced where she used to sit. Deliberate. He noticed it and said nothing. He rang for tea. He sat behind his desk. He resisted the impulse to organize the papers between them because she had told him to leave it, and he was going to do what she told him. The tea came. The footman left. Silence. Abigail poured the tea herself, both cups, which was something she used to do in the early months of their marriage before the formalities of the household had gradually absorbed every small natural gesture into protocol. She pushed his cup across the desk toward him. She picked up her own. "I have been thinking," she began, "about what you wrote, about the pursuit, about being incomplete on purpose." He waited. He was not going to fill her silences anymore. "I think you told me the truth," she said. "I think that is actually what was happening. And I want you to understand that understanding the reason does not undo what the reason caused. But—" She paused, and in that pause he held very still. "It changes the shape of it. Knowing what was broken is different from not knowing. It does not make it smaller. It makes it comprehensible. And comprehensible things can be—" She turned her cup in her hands. "Worked with." "Abigail, I'm not finished." He closed his mouth. "I need to tell you some things," she said. "Things that I have not said because I was protecting myself from having to say them, and I have decided that I am done protecting myself from things I actually need to say." She looked at him steadily. "I need you to listen without responding until I am done." "All right." She took a breath. Not a steadying breath, she was already steady, which was somehow more significant. She was not working to hold herself together. She was simply present. "There was a night in March," she began. "About 5 months after I left. It was 3 in the morning and I was awake, and I had been awake for 2 hours, and I was lying in the dark in my room at Mercer Hall, and I thought I have made a catastrophic mistake. I thought he is never going to change, and I am never going to stop loving him. And I have walked away from my marriage and my home and the life I built, and I am sleeping alone in my father's house at 31 years old. I thought all of this at 3 in the morning, and I was absolutely certain that I had destroyed everything." Benjamin did not move. "And then morning came," she continued. "And I got up, and I went to the school, and Nell Briggs had learned to write the letter A, which was the one she had been unable to produce for a week, and she held up her slate, and her face was—" She stopped. "I sat in that room and I watched that child and I thought, this is real. This I built. This nobody gave me and nobody can take from me." And the terror from 3 o'clock in the morning became something I could carry instead of something that was carrying me. She looked at him. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand that leaving you was not an easy thing I did without cost. I want you to understand that I fought for that choice every day for months, and I won, and I am not going to apologize for winning. I don't want you to apologize for anything." The words came out with a force he had not planned. "Abigail, you have never owed me an apology for a single decision you made after October. Not one." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly towards something softer, not weaker softer, the difference between hardness and strength. "Good," she said. "I wanted to hear you say that. I mean it. I know you do." She set her cup down. "That is part of what I needed to establish." He was quiet. "Lord Fairfax proposed," she said directly. "I know. I did not say yes." The air in the room changed. "I did not say yes," she repeated carefully, "because I was not ready to say yes. Not because I do not value him, I do genuinely more than I can adequately explain. But I could not say yes to a man who deserves a complete yes when I was not able to give him one. And I could not give him one until I came here." She looked at Benjamin with the directness he had come to recognize over the past year as entirely authentically hers. "So I am here." Benjamin felt something move through him that was too large and too complicated to be simply relief. He pressed his hands flat on the desk to keep them still. "What do you need from me?" His voice was controlled, but underneath it was everything. Everything 12 months of letters and empty rooms and quiet tenant cottages and a child's slate in a lane. "Tell me what you need, and I will give it to you honestly." "I need to ask you things," she said. "Not on paper, where I can watch your face. Then ask." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "If I came back, and I am not saying I am what would be different, not in the abstract, specifically, what would you do differently from the first day?" He had thought about this. He had thought about it for months in different forms, and he had arrived at an answer that was not a performance, but a list of specific concrete commitments made to himself in the privacy of his own study. He pulled it up now, not as a recitation, but as a truth. "I would ask you what you are thinking," he said. "Not when it was convenient or when I needed something. Every day. Because you were always thinking something worth knowing, and I spent 3 years not asking." He paused. "I would come to dinner, not sometimes, every evening unless there was a genuine reason, and I would tell you in advance if there was, and I would not let you eat alone again." Another pause. "I would tell you when I was struggling instead of going somewhere else to be admired for not struggling. I would stop needing external confirmation that I am interesting and start being interested in the person in front of me." He looked at her. "I would never again let someone say something unkind to you without speaking. I would never let anyone, including myself, make you smaller in any room." She was watching his face. He said, "And I would tell you that you are remarkable, not as a compliment. As a fact, I intend to state regularly until you are as certain of it as you are of your own name, because I spent 3 years withholding it, and you spent 3 years doubting yourself in its absence, and I am not going to let that stand." The room was very quiet. She looked at him for a long time. Not the guarded assessment of someone deciding whether to trust. Something more open than that, more real. "You are different," she said quietly. "I am trying to be." "No." She shook her head slightly. "Not trying. You are. There is a difference, and I can see it." A pause. "That is what frightens me." He frowned. "That I've changed. That it matters to me that you've changed." She looked away briefly, then back. "I spent 8 months becoming a woman who did not need you to change, who was completely herself without you, who was genuinely fine, and I am proud of that woman. I do not want to lose her." Her voice tightened barely at the edges. "I am afraid that coming back means losing her." That was the real thing. He could feel it, the weight of it, the specific fear that was not about him at all, but about her own hard-won self, the person she had become in the year since the ballroom. He leaned forward. "Abigail." His voice was very quiet. "The woman who built the school, who walks into a village and learns everyone's name, who taught herself to eat breakfast in her morning dress before her hair was done because she decided she was allowed to. That woman did not exist because I was absent. She existed because you stopped making yourself small for someone who wasn't worth it." He held her gaze. "She doesn't disappear if you come back. She disappears if I make you small again. And I am telling you, I am promising you that I understand the difference now, and the difference is everything." Abigail's jaw worked briefly. She was not going to cry. He did not expect her to cry. But something was moving through her that required a moment of internal processing, and he waited for it because this was exactly the kind of silence he was learning to honor. "That is a very significant promise," she said finally. "I know what it is. And if you break it, then I will have failed at the only thing I have ever actually tried to get right." He said it without deflection. "And you will be entirely justified in whatever you decide to do." She picked up her teacup, set it down, picked up her gloves, set them down. Small Abigail gestures, the thinking gestures, the ones she had stopped suppressing. "I need to tell you something else," she said. "Tell me." "I read all the letters, in order, 3 nights ago." She looked at him with an expression he could not entirely decipher, or rather he could decipher it, but the combination of things in it required a moment. Sorrow. Recognition. Something that was almost the thing he was hoping for. "I read them from February through last week, and I saw what you were doing. Not just in the content, in the progression, the way the sentences changed, the way you stopped managing the language and started just saying things." She paused. "You wrote yourself honest. I watched you do it across 12 months of letters, and I do not know how to tell you what that is worth to me, except to say that it is worth more than I expected anything from you to be worth again." Benjamin did not trust his voice for a moment. "Abigail, I am not done." But her voice had shifted. Something in it was different. The edge that had been there since she walked in, the careful, protective edge of a woman who has learned to be her own guardian, was not gone, but was permeable perhaps, in a way it had not been an hour ago. I am not done, and I need to say the rest before I lose my nerve, and I very rarely lose my nerve anymore, so please let me finish. Yes. He pressed his hands flat on the desk again. I'm sorry, go ahead. She took a breath. I am still in love with you, she said. I did not want to be. I worked very hard not to be for several months. I was not successful. She said it the way she said difficult truths, plainly, without dramatics, meeting it straight on. I am in love with who you were in the beginning, and I am in love with who you have been becoming, and I do not know if those two things are the same man or two different men, and I suspect the answer is somewhere between. But there it is. That is the truth of it. The study was entirely silent. He felt it land in him, not like something he had been waiting to hear, though he had been waiting, but like something that had weight and consequence and responsibility attached to it. Something that was not the end of anything, but the beginning of a very serious undertaking. That is the most important thing anyone has said to me in my life, he told her, and I do not intend to treat it as anything less than that. Good. Her voice wavered once at the end of the word, just once. Because I am not giving it to you for free. I gave it to you for free for 3 years, and I watched what happened to it. This time it comes with conditions. Name them. She did not hesitate. The school, she said. It is mine, not a hobby, not a charity project that reflects well on the Ashford name. Mine. I run it. I make the decisions about it. You support it if you choose to, but you do not direct it, and you do not reduce it, and you do not fold it into the estate's social reputation without my consent. Agreed, completely. My correspondence is mine. I manage it. The household decisions are made by me, not by a social secretary hired to approximate my preferences. If we have guests, I decide the nature of our hospitality. I am not the ornament of this house. I am the person who runs it. Yes, if I need to tell you something difficult, I will tell you. And you will not manage it, or smooth it, or redirect it. You will hear it. Her voice was steady and direct, and entirely herself. And if you are struggling with something the way you are still capable of being, you will tell me. Not after. Not when it has already cost us something. When it is happening. We are not two separate people sharing a house. We are trying to be something different from what we were. Yes. He meant it with everything he had. Every one of those, yes. And if you fail? She looked at him with complete clarity. If there is a night 6 months from now when I eat alone and you don't come, and there is no genuine reason, I need you to understand that I will not stay and make myself smaller again. I know now what I am without you. I know I can build things. I know I can be someone without your approval, or your attention, or your love. I survived it. Her voice did not break, but it was close to something. I do not want to survive it again, but I can. And you need to know that I can. Because I am not coming back to be the woman I was. I am coming back as the woman I am. Benjamin stood. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her 2 feet away, close enough for the conversation to be real, far enough to give her every choice. I know who you are, he said. I have spent 12 months learning who you are. I should have spent the 3 years before that doing the same thing, and I did not, and I will carry that always. He looked at her face, the face he had stopped really looking at somewhere in the first year of their marriage and had been unable to stop looking at since October. I am not asking you to forgive what I was. I am asking you to believe what I am now. And I understand that belief is not a gift. It is something I earn, every day, with specific concrete actions. And I intend to spend the rest of my life earning it. She stood. They were the same height, which had always struck her as right somehow, and it still did. She looked at him directly with those gray eyes that saw things clearly, and always had, and had learned over this last year, to trust what they saw. You had better not waste it, she said quietly. I have a very good memory. I am counting on that. Something in her expression broke open. Finally, not into tears, not into softness exactly, but into something real. The face of a woman who has fought for herself for a year and won, and who is now choosing from the full strength of that winning to open a door she had every right to keep closed. She put her hand out. He took it, both hands around hers, the old-fashioned gesture, the one Lord Fairfax used. He held on. "One more thing," she said. "Anything. The necklace." She looked at him steadily. "I do not want it back. I do not want the same necklace on the same chain, meaning the same thing it meant before. If you ever give me jewelry again." A pause, and in the pause he saw the ghost of something that might eventually become a smile. "I want it to be something chosen for the woman I am now. Not a symbol of the marriage we had. A symbol of the one we are building." He felt something in his chest shift. Not break, not ache, but change. The way a room changes when you open all the windows and let the weather in. "That," he said, "I can do." She stayed for 3 hours. They talked, actually talked the way they had not talked in 3 years of sharing a house. She told him about the Tuesday evening adult reading lessons that had begun in September, about an older man named George, who was 64 and had never learned to read, and who had spent the first 3 sessions convinced he was incapable, and the 4th session reading his own name aloud for the first time in his life. She told him about it the way she told things, when she was not being careful with her hands, moving her voice alive with the specific texture of the story, her gray eyes lit from somewhere underneath. He listened. He asked questions. Real questions, not social questions, not the questions designed to show he was listening, but the questions of someone who actually wanted to know more. At one point she stopped mid-sentence and looked at him. "What?" His voice was careful. "You asked me a follow-up question." She said it as though she was identifying something unexpected. "Yes." "You never used to do that. Ask follow-up questions." He was quiet for a moment. "I know." She looked at him for another beat. Then she continued her story. But something in the room had shifted, warmed by 1 degree, the way rooms warm. When someone says the true thing, and everyone in the room allows it to be true. She did not move back immediately. She was not that kind of woman, and they both knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. What she did was write to Lord Fairfax that evening. A letter she showed Benjamin before she sent it, because she had decided that was important, that showing him mattered, that transparency was going to be the architecture of whatever they were building from here. Lord Fairfax's reply came in 5 days. It was warm and generous and precise, exactly as he had always been, and it contained a single line that Abigail read aloud to Benjamin when it arrived, because she felt he ought to hear it. "I hope you will both be worthy of each other. Based on the woman I have had the privilege of knowing this year, the bar is considerable." Benjamin, reading over her shoulder, said nothing for a moment. Then, "He is a good man. The best kind." She folded the letter carefully. "The kind that makes other men want to be better." They were quiet together for a moment. A comfortable quiet, not charged, not managed. Just 2 people standing in a room, holding the weight of what had brought them here, and choosing with full knowledge of the cost to stay. She returned to Ashford Estate in December. Not as a woman resuming her old life. As a woman bringing her own life with her, the school which now had a second teacher, which had Tuesday evening reading lessons, which had a waiting list of 12 children for the next year's intake. The books with the annotated margins, which had multiplied considerably and now occupied 3 full shelves. The correspondence she managed herself. The opinions she no longer folded away. Will the garden boy came with her and was immediately adopted by the Ashford kitchen staff, who found his running commentary on the world both alarming and extremely entertaining. The household adjusted to her. Not her to the household. That distinction mattered, and Benjamin understood that it mattered, and he told his housekeeper on her first day back that Mrs. Ashford's preferences and decisions were to be followed without question, and if there was ever a conflict between his preference and hers, his preference yielded. The housekeeper received this instruction with the barely concealed relief of a woman who had spent 3 years trying to serve a mistress who was being systematically undermined. Abigail walked into the house and did not shrink. She did not adjust her volume or her opinions, or the way she moved through rooms. She moved through them the way she had been moving through Mercer Hall for the past year, like a woman who was entirely present in the space she occupied. The first test came in January. Not a dramatic test, not a public one. The most private kind, a dinner guest who made a comment offhand and socially cushioned but unmistakably pointed about Abigail's school, and whether education for tenant children was not perhaps a somewhat idealistic project given the practical realities of agricultural labor. The table had 12 people at it. Benjamin looked at the guest. He did not weigh the social cost of what he was about to say. He did not manage his expression or calculate the response. He said quietly and clearly, "My wife has made it considerably more than idealistic. 3 of her former students have this year secured positions above what their fathers held. That is not idealism. That is results." 12 people at the table heard it. Abigail across from him did not look at him immediately. She waited 2 full seconds. Then she looked, and what he saw in her expression was not gratitude exactly. Something older and more solid than gratitude. Recognition. He had seen her. He had said so in public without calculation, without hesitation. He had not made her smaller. The table moved on. The conversation continued. No one marked the moment with more than a beat of awareness. But Abigail picked up her fork and ate her dinner with the particular ease of a woman who is exactly where she has decided to be. In the spring, Nell Briggs brought a drawing to Ashford Estate. She had made it herself, slightly lopsided the way all of Nell's drawings were, with everyone's names printed carefully beneath the figures. The schoolhouse with Mrs. Holt and all 13 students. And in the corner, a figure considerably taller than the others, labeled in careful letters, Mrs. Ash. Abigail put it in the parlor, not the formal drawing room. The parlor, her room with the books and the writing desk and the window that looked out toward the garden that she had been gradually reforming from its inherited formality into something that actually grew things worth eating. Benjamin saw it there one evening and stood looking at it for a moment. "She spelled your name wrong," he observed. "She will learn." Abigail was reading, her feet tucked under her in the chair, her book open to a page with 3 margin notes already. "She has time." He looked at the drawing a moment longer. Then he came and sat in the chair across from her. His chair, the one that had faced her empty one for 8 months now occupied. He picked up his own book. He did not speak. They sat together in the lamplight reading. After a while he said without looking up from his page, "What are you reading?" "Agricultural Reform Theory, the new one from Edinburgh. I have 3 significant objections to Chapter 4. "Tell me." She looked up. He was looking at her. Not through her. At her with the full specific attention of a man who has learned the hard way that paying attention is not a gesture, but a practice, and who has been practicing for long enough that it has become something close to natural. She told him. He listened. He asked a follow-up question. She answered it with her hands moving. He did not say a word about the way her hands moved. That autumn, the county had a new understanding of the Ashfords. Not the understanding that came from gossip or revision or managed narrative. The understanding that comes when people simply watch 2 people together over time and see something that is real. They saw a man who sat next to his wife at every dinner and leaned toward her when she spoke. Who appeared at her school's annual review not to be seen there, but to understand what was being done, and who asked questions afterward that demonstrated he had actually listened. Who deferred to her in matters that were hers without ceremony, as though it had never been any other way. They saw a woman who had walked away from a marriage and built a life entirely her own, and then walked back in. Not because she had been swept back, not because she had weakened, but because she was strong enough to choose it with her eyes fully open. Who moved through Ashford Estate like a woman who owned herself first, and chose from that wholeness to share her life with a man who was finally worth sharing it with. Lady Harrington, who was rarely satisfied, and who expressed approval primarily by ceasing to arrange people's lives for them, stopped arranging theirs. That was for Lady Harrington a significant statement. There was a morning in October one year, almost exactly from the night she had removed the necklace, when Benjamin came into the breakfast room while Abigail was still reading, still in her morning dress, her hair escaping its pins, already a cup of tea, going cold beside her, because she had gotten absorbed and forgotten to drink it. He sat down across from her. He poured her a fresh cup and set it where she could reach it without lifting her eyes. She reached for it without lifting her eyes. Drank. Turned a page. He sat and drank his own tea and read his correspondence, and the room was warm, and outside October moved through its last clear days with that particular sharp light. After a while, Abigail put her book down. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. "I need a new book," she said. "I have run out of margin space in this one." He considered this. What is it on? Land reform and its social effects. The author is entirely too pleased with himself, but the research in Chapter 7 is genuinely interesting. I'll write to the London bookseller. I can write to the London bookseller. I know you can. He looked at her steadily. I want to. She looked at him for a moment. The gray eyes direct and clear. The eyes of a woman who had loved and lost and rebuilt and chosen with full knowledge of what choosing cost. The eyes of the most remarkable person he had ever known, reading him with the accuracy of someone who had decided to see him honestly and had not once looked away. All right, she said. She picked up her book. He picked up his correspondence. Outside, the October light fell clean and final across the fields of Ashford Estate, and the school in the county was full of children learning their names, and the garden was growing things worth eating. And somewhere in the parlor, a slightly lopsided drawing was pinned to the wall with Mrs. Ashe spelled wrong in careful letters, waiting to be corrected by a girl who had all the time in the world. The man who had chased every other woman had finally stopped running. The woman who had walked away had not come back to rescue him. She had come back because she was strong enough to choose him, and because he had finally become a man worth choosing. That was not a small thing. That was everything.